see. Ah, you only need to know. Well, if you want to say yes, say yes. And if you want to say no, say no. 'Cause there's a million ways to go. You know that there are. And if you want to be me, be me. And if you want to be you, be you. 'Cause there's a million things to do. You know that there are. You can do what you want. The opportunity's on. And if you find a new way, you can do it today. You can make it all true. And you can make it undo. You see, oh, it's easy. Oh, you only need to know. Well, if you want to sing out, sing out. And if you want to be free, be free. 'Cause there's a million things to be. You know that there are, 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 you know that there are.
Thanks, you guys. Well, there was January, and I felt like I'd left my chapel to the very last minute. This kind of procrastination is different from those of you who on Sunday morning exclaim, "Geez, it's my chapel tonight, what am I going to do?" My procrastination is that of a terrified writer. Back in the days of essays and teacher corrections, which you're in the middle of, I might read the remark, "needs more work," but I'd see, this is terrible writing. This is a perception I've been able to keep up by living around and writing for teachers. Then there's the public speaking part of chapel. Not as bad as the writing, but still palpable. Nervously staring out at the anticipating, judging eyes and faces, wondering how you'll be judged. I know some of you sign up for extra chapels, but not me. Sometimes if the stars align and I ask just at the right time, I can accidentally miss a chapel. Did I have a chapel last year? As a student, chapel at Midland was a trade-off for me. Being brought up Catholic in the 50s was a major guilt trip. No big deal. If you didn't confess all the things you didn't want people to find out, you'd go to hell. The best way to deal with this is by omission, hence guilt. I couldn't wait to replace the weekly Catholic Mass with non-denominational singing, short religious and philosophical readings, and light prayer, but every day and twice on Sunday. At 2 hymns per chapel, that's close to 500 a year. The Stoic and Midland music program, onward Christian soldiers marching as to war. So where did this whole Midland Chapel thing come from? The simple answer is, historically, communities would have chapels and churches where folks could practice their beliefs, pray, clear their minds, and contemplate the unknowable. Paul Squibb probably never considered his school without one. Religion was part of many educational endeavors. Thus, in the summer of '32, the site of the chapel was confirmed. The following is a quote from Paul Squibb taken from a 1969 interview by James Mink. The chapel was a storage room where they had grain and harness, team harness, saddles, and emergency sleeping quarters for an extra hand. It was a shabby, sagged-down building, inadequately braced. But in the summer of 1932, before school opened, Steve Gassaway and Charles Loomis, who were visiting us, and I, using rope or cable, pulled the little building together and then braced it so it wasn't saggy anymore. I suppose the materials involved didn't cost $10, and that was all it took to cross-brace the rafters and pull a very saggy, shabby-looking building into line. and it has stood up very well ever since, at the cost of a little sweat and $10 worth of lumber. Soon the chapel and the front of the chapel was added, and I quote Mr. Squibb again, "I received a gift of $50 from a General Charles Reeve. He celebrated his 90th birthday by sending us a check for $50. That happened to be just what was needed to build the transept of the chapel as it stands today." That's this section right in here. Skitz carpenters built that transept for just about $50. General Reeves' $50 almost covered the cathedral-like structure of Gordon Batten, if you can call it a cathedral. Clearly, thrift was an important part of Paul Squibb's nature, hence he said, "I built a cathedral for $50. $60 invested, and the shed was ready for a pulpit and students. Mr. Squibb's religious practice is described as being a cautious explorer rather than a confirmed resident. He did not like religious dogma, but was someone who would enjoy engaging in conversations about the unknowable and the unprovable, and banter philosophically with those interested. His concept for chapel was also simple. On some level, it was a break from the daily chores of school life. Here is a reflection on chapel from Mink's '69 interview. "I might say that the chapel was at the very heart and center of our lives, physically and mentally and emotionally. I tried to keep it that way. In some cases, there was resentment toward the notion of compulsory chapel, but on the whole, I should say that the chapel, that 15 minutes or so, sometimes less, of everybody getting together and singing a hymn, reading a passage from the Bible, preferably the New Testament, and saying a few prayers, for most students represented a time of trying to get away from the daily concerns of life and sail off to distant spheres, or perhaps in many cases just daydreaming. I think that very often the students did as I did as a child. I could sit through quite long passage of scripture without having the faintest idea of what was being read. I was daydreaming, and perhaps venturing into regions that I otherwise would never have bothered to venture into. From the beginning, the headmaster or a senior would run the chapels and do the readings. This chapel model stayed pretty much the same for about 50 years. In the 60s, each senior would run a chapel for a week at a time, preparing 6 or 7 readings during the week. But as long as you didn't forget, it wasn't too bad. Students would read from a poem or a verse from the Bible. I often read passages from a book called The Prophet. Of course, my class of '68 was small in numbers, so we had to do 3 rotations. So I did about, 18 chapels that year. Since Carl Munger, Ben's dad, was minister, he took over most of the Sunday morning chapels, and Ben Rich, the headmaster at that time, only had to do a few chapels during the year. Not long before I arrived in the 60s, the chorus and organ section was added to the rear of the chapel where the seniors sat. And the organ was moved from the alcove, which is now the storage room behind those boards over there on the side, to the back. The presence of the chorus gave good direction to the students as they sang the hundreds or thousands of hymns during their Midland tenure. As the 80s moved into the 90s, some old traditions became less important, and dress-up night and chapel began to lose their hold that they had on the daily Midland life. This change is okay. It reflects society around us, and we can't stay completely out of touch. I do miss the school singing, though. The good news is that chapel readings have become an important aspect of our weekly lives. Many of you write personal stories about your lives or your discoveries. They're very powerful revelations, while others read about things that interest them. Often, we get a chance to better understand or view an interest of a senior or faculty member giving the chapel. For all the changes that the chapel has had over the years, there is one tradition that continues and reminds us that you are what's important. Gary Lewis writes from Dominion over Palm and Pine. It was Louise Squibb's idea to make wallboards for the chapel each year, bearing the names of all the students who had sung and prayed there. But it was Miss Crime's suggestion to stagger the names with colored initials like an illuminated ancient manuscript. For me, it's your names on the wall that change this old shed into something much deeper. You can sense it in visitors when you bring them here. We talk about our incredible land and our strength of our culture and philosophy, but sometimes it's difficult to put a finger on what really makes Midland so different and special. Well, it's here. It's you, and it's all of your predecessors, working, living, laughing, and prevailing.